Hello, everybody. We're going to go really in depth today into this book right here, Tom Clancy's Red Rabbit. Um, that's actually my first edition. So this is the third book in the Jack Ryan universe timeline, but it was actually written in 2002. So it was the 11th book that Tom Clancy himself actually wrote. So it was way later in Tom Clancy's writing career, but way earlier in Jack Ryan's career. In fact, it's really the second book that kind of focused on Jack Ryan. Um, the first one focused on Clark when he was in Vietnam. But remember, we're doing this looking for was Clancy an agency asset of some kind, and maybe he didn't know it. Now, this book is a mishmash of historical events that were fictionalized. Clancy was a well-known researcher, or at least well-known for being whispered to by the right people. Uh, uh, this one is 600 pages long. So where are we set, right? So where does this book sit in the timeline? It was in 1982, so it was before the events in Hunt for Red October, which was set in 1984. But after the events in Patriot Games, which was in 81 or 82, according to the sort of, when did it take place? Um, Jack and his family in this book are in a posting in London. Jack's a very young analyst. His wife is there to learn from some well-known eye surgeons. Remember, she's an eye surgeon. Ed and Mary Pat Foley, who are really only very minor characters in the movies that kind of just get talked about or kind of walk past a couple of times. But they actually play significant roles in some of the books. And they play a very significant role in this one. In this case, they're undercover agencies working as a husband and wife team in Moscow, and they are stationed at the embassy and have these cover stories. But they're really, premier field spooks for the CIA, a husband and wife team. They're awesome. The main plot line is based around a real assassination attempt that took place against Pope John Paul. Um, uh, the Russians were always kind of suspected to possibly be behind it in real life, and I think Tom Clancy wanted to mess with that as a writer because it's sometimes fun to kind of pull apart fictional events that there's still some question mark about. I did it in one of my books, and lots of writers do. It's a lot of fun to do. Now, this one, Tom Clancy, I think, really wants you, the reader, to know how much he knows about the 80s general operations of the agency. Because remember, at this point in his life, there were questions that were always coming up. Oh, who's talking to you? Who's telling you stuff? And he's like, no, no, I'm smart. I'm just really smart. He's always kind of trying to prove how smart he is. And I think this book, he kind of goes overboard with that. But it was written in 2002. So most of what would have been in this book was well placed for the early 80s timeline, but it would have been really well known by that. So this is like 40 years after the events in the book take place, or 20 years after the events in the book take place that he wrote it. So, 2 decades have gone past, and by then you kind of know everything that the agencies would have been good at anyway. But he got so detailed that he just kind of was like beating you over the head with, I want you to know how smart I am and how much I know about this stuff. So the story does go deep on the extreme distrust also that existed in the early 80s between the USSR and the USA, which again, not a big surprise, right? We were sort of enemies in the Cold War, and we're kind of back to that again. But again, not anything that's surprising. So not anything that you could say, yeah, he found that out because he was being whispered to by the agency. Um, he goes into a lot of detail actually about how different life was in the two nations. If you're a civilian or if you're KGB or CIA, how much different is life. The story does have very specific aspects from history beyond the Pope murder plot, specifically from World War II. Um, where in part of the plot line they're actually sort of doing a fictional version of Operation Mincemeat and even parts of Operation Paperclip with lots of details on the planning aspects of both. So he kind of digs into all that stuff. So he helps you see how different agencies would plan that stuff out. Now, some writers just like to put you in the action. Tom Clancy likes to put you in the action and in the planning for that, so you kind of see both sides of it. And there's something to that, right? So it's something to, hey, how did they figure out what to go do in the field? There's a lot of action writers, like myself included, or Lee Child or others, like, no, man, let's just have the action beats. Let's forget the planning side. And Tom Clancy really gives you both, and he does it in a very compelling kind of way. But he does go deep on the struggles in between the two political and economic systems, the USSR and the USA. I said at the height of the Cold War, so we would have known. Um, so you can see the writing in his writing, the challenges faced by people that lived in the USSR with long lines, and you can only get certain things, and only certain people can get certain things. But Tom Clancy does a really good job of making that kind of come alive. And one thing I found really interesting was in sort of that front 20% of the book, he goes to great length to talk about how in the Russia, well, of course, everybody's equal, right? We're all equal. Until you have the right political job title, then you get perks. You get another bigger job title, you get more perks. So he shows the corruption as you go up the political food chain. And he kind of hinted at, yeah, but here in the United States, we don't have that problem. And if you look around at the United States today, you're like, is that really true? I don't know if it is or not. I think some of our elected officials use their office to get a lot of perks. And they probably did back then, but I think at least them, they were trying to be a little more clandestine about it, a little more guarded about it. Now they're just like, we don't care. We'll let you know. Whatever. Um, but anyway, so he did go backwards this far in the timeline, but why? Why did he want to write this story? Why, if you get into Tom Clancy's head for a minute, why did he want to write this? Was he trying to prove a point to us that he wasn't a CIA asset or what? Well, I don't think it was anything like that. I don't think this book had anything to do with any of that stuff. Tom Clancy himself went to Jesuit schools. He was raised Catholic. And I think, and I was raised Catholic, so I kind of understand some of where he's coming from. I think he wanted to do something with the failed attempt on Pope John Paul because that was world news. I mean, I don't care if you're Catholic or not. If you were alive at that point, you knew it happened and you were kind of, you knew as much as the news would let you know. But I think, it was also a story he didn't have to do much research on because he probably just had absorbed it over the years. Everything that's in the book, he would have probably learned along throughout his lifetime someplace. So this is probably one he didn't have to research very, very hard. But I find it interesting that the USSR, when he puts you in the character inside the KGB, he he kind of gets to the point where he's like the KGB refers to the Pope, in this disrespectful way. They refer to him as the Polish priest because Pope John Paul was from Poland. And the KGB at the time, or Russia at the time, was having issues with Poland, and Pope John Paul, spoke out about it. And he's like, "Well, if I have to, I'll resign and I'll go back and I'll stand by my countrymen." And so the Russia KGB gets upset about that. Russia's like, "What do we do about this guy? He's showing us up on the world stage." So of course the KGB starts kicking it around, and they decide maybe we should just take him out. All right. So KGB starts to discuss it. There's some leadership discussions like, should we, shouldn't we? Where should we go with this guy? And of course, the idea comes up, says, we should take him out. So even some people inside the KGB are like, dude, what the heck? We can't take out it's the Pope, right? But nobody wants to say that to the leadership because it's the KGB and you don't do that. But they're at least thinking to themselves, what the heck, man? So others inside the KGB, though, by comparison, it was really funny. Um, Look at taking out the Pope as good for their career. Some people are like, wait a minute. The other people are like, awesome. It just depends on how you look at it. Um, but anyway, I thought that part was a little bit humorous. The other thing Clancy gets into detail on is the USSR was rumored, and I don't know how true it is, to have a certain disdain for organized religion. Even the citizens over there, were kind of like, it's religion, who cares? Because only the state was to be worshipped, and that part I would believe is true, at least at the higher echelons. But they don't really have as much organized religion as the rest of the world does. So the USSR puts together this plan to kill the Pope. And what I found interesting about the plan was, especially given that this week there's more JFK files released, the plan they came up with to kill the Pope himself was we need two shooters. You need one to shoot the Pope. And oh, by the way, that guy's probably going to be captured because it's very difficult to get away with one of these on a very public figure like that. So he's probably going to be picked up. Um, so what do we do about that? Do we just say, well, hopefully he won't talk? Or do you say, yeah, prisoners have a tendency to talk, right? They have a tendency to try to figure out how to save their own skin. Everybody can be made to talk at some level. Not everybody, but almost everybody can be made to talk. So the USSR comes up with this, they call it a pro, and the pro's like, oh, we need two shooters. One to take out the Pope and one to take out the first shooter because in the chaos, while they're looking for that guy, they're going to go, well, okay, that guy somehow, the police must have gotten him, right? Yeah. And the second guy can escape in the chaos. And you got a very good chance of him getting away. So that was how they decided to do it. And I find that interesting that JFK was killed, and then a few days later, his assassin was taken out. Right? What happened there? And very recently, we had an attempt on candidate Trump, now President Trump, and his shooter was taken out. I don't know anything about him, so his shooter was taken out by the Secret Service. I'm not saying it was a plot by the Russians. Um, plus he's fine. So anyway, the Foleys in the story are in Moscow, so they're sort of the premier group, right? And the Foleys are really the ones that kind of break the story apart. And I don't want to give anything away if you haven't read the book, because I think this is probably one of Tom Clancy's not more widely read books. But it's a great story. Um, I also think Tom Clancy had a tendency to write things that were sort of propagandist for the USA in a way, not propagandist, but puff us up, right? Um, and part of the B storyline with Jack Ryan's wife being in London to learn from British surgeons. I think they actually kind of goes into detail about what she's working on and what's going on over there versus the U.S. medical system. And I think he was trying to puff up the United States medical system versus the rest of the world. And maybe he's right, maybe he's wrong. I think our insurance system needs to be overhauled a bit, but we've got some great medical care. But the UK, he even makes the point in the book. Well, it's free, right? So you get you get what you pay for. So the book probably could have been 100 pages shorter. It is a little bit over 600 pages, but it's Tom Clancy. He gets very detailed. He did get a little bit repetitious in places. So while I think it is one of his stronger storylines, I think it was probably a draft away from being one of his best books. But don't let that stop you from reading it if you are a Clancy fan. It is a good one, and it does have a lot to do with the intricacies of how to pull off an assassination on a world leader. And with detail only Clancy can provide because he's one of those guys, right? He gets down in the nitty gritty of everything. I don't think this one helps answer the question of was he an agency asset or not. I don't think it helps answer the question of was he getting information from intel agencies at all. I think it's just a very good uh, spy thriller. And if you give it a shot, let me know what you think. If you've read it before, drop a comment. Don't forget to hit subscribe, and we'll see you on the next book, which, by the way, the next one in the timeline series is Hunt for Red October, which I've read a couple of times and I'm actually going to read again. But we'll talk about the movie on that one as well. So we'll see everybody on the next video, and I hope everybody has a great day.